Welcome back, all you lovely people. Oh man, my wife was just in Armenia, man. She's lucky. She gets to travel. I'm stuck here in Buffalo. She was just in Armenia and got me some really good minty tea. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I'd show it to you, but you can't see me. Well, anyway, in this video, I just want to go through now a kind of a skill, which isn't quite in the reading, but it'll make doing the things from the reading a little bit easier. And this is the idea of parsing an argument. Because here are the instructions. So this is very practical. So basically, I'm going to explain these instructions to you, and then we'll work through some examples. So parsing an argument for its logical content works as follows. So you're given an argument, underline and denote with a CI any conclusion indicators, and then second, circle and denote with a PI any premise indicators. Sometimes there'll be indicators, sometimes not, but these first two are very helpful. Look for any of those fancy indicator words. Those are the first two steps. And the third step is to circle and denote with a C the argument's main conclusion. So then you know, where is this all headed? You know, what are all these things supposed to be? Sometimes the main conclusion will be at the beginning. I'll tell you what, that's usually happy, but some people like to be a mystery writer and put the main conclusion at the very end. But wherever it is, circle it and denote it with a C. And then finally, you can then underline and number each premise. Again, each reason that's being given for why to believe that the conclusion is true. All right, so now I'm just going to walk through some examples to show you how it's done. So here's a quick one. We've seen already the defendant must go to jail because he is guilty of stealing the jewels. We've seen this already. We know that there's two statements here, the defendant going to jail, guilty of stealing the jewels. But we'll start with the premise indicator which helps us understand it. And so we circle and mark with a PI the premise indicator. There's no conclusion indicator, so we skip that step. But I told you last time, we know what the conclusion is. It's that the defendant must go to jail, so we circle it, mark it with a C. And then what's the reason that we're given for why the defendant must go to jail? Well, because, thank you, premise indicator. Premise indicator tells us, what follows is, yes, it's a premise. And we'll underline it and number it with 1. And that's the only reason that we're given for why the defendant must go to jail in this argument. So then there it is. I've just parsed that argument now. So let's start doing ones that are a little more interesting. All right, example number 2. And feel free to pause this and think about how you're going to do this. But consider the following argument. The defendant's signed a confession, thus he is guilty of stealing the jewels. Furthermore, we know he was present at the scene of the crime. And so let's identify, that first step is any conclusion indicators. We have that thus. If you go back to that list, there thus is on there. That's a fun one. We underline and put a CI for a conclusion indicator. Second, identify any premise indicators. There are actually none. I know it's tempting to put furthermore as one. I've seen students do this, but this is not an inference indicator. This isn't telling, furthermore doesn't tell us, furthermore says here's some more stuff, but it doesn't tell us what the more stuff is. Is the more stuff a premise, or is the more stuff more about the conclusion? It's not telling us anything about the inference. It's just saying here's some more stuff. So furthermore is not marked because it's not indicating a premise, and it's not indicating a conclusion. It's just saying, here's some more stuff for you. All right, well, what's the main conclusion? I think if you read this over, you'll realize that this is all trying to show us that the defendant, everything being said here is ultimately about the defendant being guilty. And so we circle that and mark it with that C. Alrighty then. And now we can identify the premises. What are the reasons given to show that the defendant is guilty? And once you think, I'm looking for reasons for why this person might be guilty. I'm like making hand motions here and you can't even see me. It's hilarious. Anyway, what reasons are we given to believe that the defendant, What reasons are we given to believe that the defendant is guilty? The defendant signed a confession. Guilty of stealing the jewels. Okay, that makes sense. And we know the defendant was present at the scene of the crime. That's another reason that you might think that they're guilty of stealing the jewels. And then we've numbered them 1 and 2. And there it is. That's the parsed argument, the logical structure. And again, the logical structure is just what's the conclusion and what are the reasons given for it. And we've marked any indicator words that helped us get there. All right, let's do another example. Again, you can pause and think about it. The jewels were found in the defendant's pockets, and they would only be there if he stole them. Therefore, he is guilty of stealing the jewels. So again, we do the usual. First, identify any conclusion indicators, and we have one here. Therefore, that's on the conclusion indicator. So that's good. We have a sense, because we know that what's going to follow is probably going to be a conclusion, because that's what therefore usually does. So we've underlined it. We'll get there in a moment. Any premise indicators? In this case, there are no premise indicators, so nothing to circle there. Third, identify the main conclusion. Well, thank you. Conclusion indicator, you gave me a sense. Again, all this is leading up to the idea for why the defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels. So that is our conclusion. We're given reasons to believe in this about why they're guilty of stealing the jewels. And now we're going to figure out the premises. What reasons have we been given to think that the defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels? And again, we have two claims, two statements supporting this. The jewels were found in the defendant's pocket, underline, mark with a 1, and they would only be there if the defendant stole them. Underline that and mark that with a 2. So we're given two more reasons in this case to believe the defendant is guilty of stealing the jewels. And again, there's the logical structure. We know the premises and we know the conclusion. Example 4. Again, you can pause and think about this if you'd like. Does anyone pause it? Probably not, but hey, why not? Anyway, here we go. The defendant was present at the scene of the crime because his fingerprints were on the safe. We know his fingerprints were on the safe because the forensic report confirms it. All right, well, are there any conclusion indicators? Turns out there aren't any conclusion indicators in here, so nothing to do there. But when we get to the premise indicators, yes, we have because appears twice. Nice, thank you. So we know what's going to be following those statements is probably a premise. So because is circled and marked with a PI. Now we can identify the main conclusion. You might have to read this for a moment, but you realize, oh, what is this all about? Showing that the defendant was present at the scene of the crime. So that is the main conclusion. Circle it, mark it with a C. Yeah, ooh, yes, sir. And now identify the premises. What reasons are we given to believe that the defendant was at the scene of the crime? Whoops. Keep flipping around there. Well, again, we're given two reasons. Fingerprints were on the safe, and the forensic report confirms it. Underline and mark those. Now, it's tempting to underline this part here. We know his fingerprints were on the safe, but this is just repeating premise 1. It's really just saying his fingerprints were on the safe, and we know that because the forensic report confirms that. So the part here that I did not underline is just repeating premise 1. We don't have to underline it again. We've already marked the claim about the fingerprints being on the safe in the previous sentence. And again, there it is. There's our logical structure. We've identified the main thing being shown, the conclusion, and then two reasons given, the fingerprints on the safe and the forensic report confirming that. All right, and so that's it for doing the basic argument parsing examples here. Okay, let's take another quick break. And then when we come back, we'll talk about how we can take what we've done now, and then what the reading says to do is make it into an argument map or into an argument diagram. We'll come back and finish up the module with doing that.